Hello friends, welcome back. Let us continue with the discussion related to organizational change and management. Today I am going to talk about another approach to change management, that is Kotter's 8-step plan for implementing change. In the previous session I have discussed about Levin's 3-step model. Today I am going to talk about the Kotter's 8-step plan for implementing change. This is basically an extension to the Levin's 3-step model, and where he has built upon with the base as Levin's 3-step model only, that is unfreezing, movement and refreezing. In his proposed model, he has identified some list or 8 sequential steps where he has focused on that what mistakes a manager can make while implementing or initiating any change. So, John Kotter of the Harvard Business School built on Levin's 3-step model to create a more detailed approach for implementing change, and he began by listing common mistakes which managers make when trying to initiate change, and these 8 steps are sequential to overcome those problems. So, basically it is not mistake, but the problems that any manager would experience in implementing or initiating any change. So, what are those 8 steps? The first is establish a sense of urgency by creating a compelling reason for why change is needed. So, this requires strong communication and effective communication through manager to the employees that why that change has been initiated, the urgency, the compelling requirement of that change in order to maintain effectiveness, and that communication should be so effective and influential that the employees should be convinced, they agree that why this change is required. Form a coalition with enough power to lead change. This is about forming a coalition, means bringing together people who are in favor of the change and then creating a power to initiate that change. The third, create a new vision to direct the change and strategies for achieving the vision. It is about to moving ahead of the baseline of the strategy of the organization, that maybe the basic goals can be achieved on some basic line or pattern, but if the change is more than beyond the basic goals, then definitely the strategy has to be derooted or it has to be re-established in a way that the vision that has been created for change must be implemented in a very systematic manner. Fourth is communicate the vision throughout the organization. So, it is not only about communicating the vision, the idea or the change initiation only to a specific group of people, but it should be communicated throughout the organization, right from top to bottom or bottom to the top officials who are in the process of that change, and every member need to be ready to accept that change. Fifth is empower others to act on the vision by removing barriers to change and encouraging risk taking and creative problem solving. So, when coalition is also formed and when employees are agreeing or being influenced by strong communication that why a change is required, at the same time organization also empowers employees in order to take certain decisions regarding the initiation of the change or implementation of the change. So, this will remove certain barriers in order to put the change in action and encourage employees and the officials to take risk and creative problem solving and indulge in solving different problems of the organization. Why problem solving? Because whenever a change is being initiated, it is not only resistance, but at the same time some problems also do exist in the initiation process of the change. So, in order to remove those barriers and changes, then problem solving skills are also required. So, for that requires giving some empowerment to the employees in terms of power, in terms of competence, in terms of control, where decision making is increased or the decision latitude is increased, where people can come up with strong decision making and power. Sixth, plan for, create and reward short term wins that move the organization towards the new vision. So, it is not only a one time process, step by step the change is being initiated, and every time that step is being overcome or it is crossed, the members are being rewarded for involving themselves in the change, in the process of change, and short term rewards are being offered to those people or employees who are involved in the change process. Seventh is consolidate improvements, reassess changes and make necessary adjustments in the new programs. So, this is something that whenever the change has been implemented, it is not that it is going to be very much a lucid process that has taken place. Even after the implementation of the change, some problems will definitely come up, and how those problems has to be resolved in terms of reassessment or evaluation of the plan. Then again some more changes are required. So, this is that seventh step is that stage where implementation is there, but at the same time what problems will be encountered while implementation also, that is also resolved. And the last is reinforce the changes by demonstrating the relationship between new behaviors and organizational success. This is something that resistance is over and new patterns of behaviors have been established based on the changes that has been initiated, and how new patterns of behavior has led to organizational success or effectiveness. So, that is the benchmark, and at the same time it is being measured in form of improved performances. So, these are the 8 steps which Kotter has proposed in his model, which is an expansion of Levin's 3-step model. But yes, here in order to just compare Levin's and Kotter's plan for implementing change, we can easily identify the 3 stages of the Levin's also, where stage 1 and 2 they talk about unfreezing, which is very much related to the Kotter's 8-step plan. List 1, 2, 3, 4 are related to unfreezing, right, where the need for change has been identified and how it will be communicated, that is the unfreezing. List 5, 6, 7 identifies the movement, where the desire to move ahead of the status quo has been initiated, the plan is there and the strategy is also there. This is the movement stage, where it is actually taking, problems are being encountered, and at the same time risk thinking behavior has also been emulated. And the last is 8. This is the refreezing, where changes are being demonstrated and the relationship between new behaviors and organizational success has been established. Here the benchmark has been achieved and it is being measured. So, the stages from 1 to 8 are very much similar to the Levin's 3-step model, but yes, Kotter's 8-step plan has been expanded based on the Levin's model, because Levin has identified the what are the problems that any manager would overcome or would commit certain mistakes that can be overcome by this plan. Here it is already mentioned on the slide that to note, Kotter's first 4 steps essentially extrapolate Levin's unfreezing state. Step 5, 6, 7 represent movement, and the final step works on refreezing. Thus, Kotter's contribution lies in providing managers and change agents with a more detailed guide for successfully implementing change. And what is that difference is that Kotter had identified the mistakes or the problems that any manager would encounter while implementing change, right. The next is the action research. This is a change process based on the systematic collection of data and selection of a change action based on what the analyzed data indicate. So, it is again a step by step process where data is collected based on interviews, based on some data already existing, and based on some reviews and interviews, and how that data has been collected, reviewing that data, what the data indicates, that will decide what should be the next plan of action for implementing a change. This is action research. This is another approach to change implementation. So, it is a process based on the systematic data collection and selection of a change based on what the analyzed data indicate. Its value is in providing a scientific methodology for managing planned change, because that data is being quantified, what change and in what quantity the change should be implemented. That is very easy to decide based on action research. So, when we talk about action research, it has 5 steps. The first is diagnosis, analysis, feedback, action and evaluation. We will go into detail that what each step talks about. The first is diagnosis. So, the change agent, often an outside consultant in action research, begins by gathering information about problems, concerns and needed changes from members of the organization. And this is possible only through questionnaires, only through interviews, only through reviews, that any change agent will tend to collect from the organization, which is very much analogous to any physician who search for a particular pill for the patient which is ailing. That means, it is particular prescription that any physician will prescribe to the patient. So, the change agent asks questions, review records and interviews employees and listens to their concerns. So, while interviewing the employees, the change agent is able to find out the loopholes, some lackings in the system, and based on that data the change can be initiated in a very systematic manner. So, once the diagnosis is over, it leads to the next stage, that is analysis. Diagnosis is followed by analysis. What problems do people key in on? That is, what are the problems that employees are facing and how they are focusing on those problems in order to resolve them. So, this entails what patterns do these problems seem to take. The change agent synthesizes this information into primary concerns, problem areas and possible actions. So, whatever data the change agent has, right, and what problem employees are focusing on and what is the nature of that problem, he will combine all together and then make the concern so primary that he identifies the core areas which are full of problems and then try to deal with those problems while suggesting some change. This is analysis. So, analysis is basically that once the physician has prescribed the medicine, then how that medicine will work on which part of the body, that is the analysis. The third is the feedback. This requires sharing with employees what has been found from the first and second steps. The employees, with the help of the change agent, develop action plans for bringing about any needed changes. Now, problem has been identified, the core areas has been identified, the core nature of the problem has been identified. Once these areas are being identified, the change agent will share those gaps in order to fulfill while discussing with the employees based on first and second steps, and as soon as the change agent interacts with the employees, based on the recommendation of the employees also, the change action plan is created and that is being decided to be built upon or established or implement on in the organization. This is feedback. So, whatever change agent has collected information based on diagnosis and analysis is shared with the employees, and the employees give feedback to that collected information to the change agent, and accordingly the change plan is being initiated. The fourth is action. This is the stage of action research which is set in motion. That means implementing the change in movement. The employees and the change agent carry out the specific actions they have identified to resolve the problem. It can be related to recruitment and selection, it can be related to reward system, it can be related to distribution of resources, or it can be related to any financial crisis that any organization is facing. So, once that action plan is created, it is being implemented within the organization and it is being carried out in order to resolve any existing problem. Once that action has been taken based on the change plan, the fifth stage comes the evaluation. This is consistent with the scientific underpinnings of the action research. It is evaluation of the action plan's effectiveness using the initial data gathered as a benchmark. So, it is about setting the benchmark and then comparison that whatever the problem was identified and based on the change plan that has been initiated and reaching to the next benchmark, it is about the comparison where the change has led the organization to go through. So, this is evaluation. It is about comparison with the stage from where the problem was identified and to the stage where the problem has been resolved and leading the organization to the next level. This is evaluation, right. It is about using the initial data gathered as a benchmark. So, what was the benchmark? That was something crossing that benchmark or the goal. So, once these 5 steps, that is diagnosis, analysis, feedback and action and evaluation are through, then the analysis will let us know that to what extent the change plan was successful in implementing that change and resolve the problem, right. So, next comes benefits of action research. It has 2 specific benefits. The first, it is problem focused. The change agent objectively looks for problems and the types of problem determines the type of change action. So, here the most important advantage of action research is that the change agent knows the core area that where the problem exists, he tries to focus on that problem particularly, and based on that problem focused, the change initiation is being executed accordingly. So, it is absolutely objective and a problem focused approach to change implementation. The second is that because action research engages employees so thoroughly in the process, it reduces resistance to change, because employees are participating in the change process as well as in resolving the problem. So, there is reduced resistance to change, because even employees who are participating in that process, change process, they understand the significance of the change as well as the problem. So, once employees have actively participated in the feedback stage, the change process typically takes on a momentum of its own under their sustained pressure to bring it about the change. So, the employees in itself, when they are engaged, they are participating in problem solving and change management initiation. They are themselves into the momentum in order to execute that change. So, this is about action research, which is highly problem focused. Alright. Next is organizational development. This is a very novel approach that we are going to discuss right now, in the sense that if we talk about action research, if we talk about Kotter's 8-step plan or 3-step model, they are definitely influential or effective in resolving any problem or identifying any change. But organizational development has its more philosophical approach and is more implementable when it comes to global competition. So, what is organizational development? It is a collection of planned change interventions built on humanistic democratic values that sets to improve organizational effectiveness and employee well-being. So, it has its own expansion, that if problem or change was the focus, organizational development not only focuses on focus, but they also focuses on the well-being of employees. So, this approach is more advanced and at par to other approaches that we have discussed till now, where the OB professionals are not only focusing on the problem, but they are also focusing on the well-being of employees. So, it is about humanistic and democratic approach, that democratic in terms of resolving problems in a very easy manner and in a very systematic manner, and humanistic where organizations are also concerned about the well-being of employees. So, these methods value human and organizational growth, collaborative and participative process, and spirit of inquiry. That means, there is spirit of inquiry in that they focus on a deliberate need for change, which is very much humanistic and democratic in nature. Therefore, the change agent may take the lead in OD, but there is a strong emphasis on collaboration. Collaboration here means focus and well-being of employees, problem focus and well-being of employees. So, it is a collaboration of problem and employees. So, there are 5 underlying values of organizational development: respect for people, trust and support, power equalization, confrontation and participation. So, if we talk about these values of organizational development or OD, it is about democratic and humanistic values, where employees are being considered as human beings. There is concern for human beings in this approach, and at the same time problem is also focused based on change implementation. So, respect for people, it is about individuals are perceived as responsible, conscious and caring. They should be treated with dignity and respect. So, it is not only about bringing the change and implement organizational effectiveness, it is about bringing a change within organization while having concern for employees, as they are perceived as responsible, conscious and caring assets of the organization and must be treated with dignity and respect. The other is trust and support. An effective and healthy organization is characterized by trust, authenticity, openness and supportive climate. So, this is another change implementation, that in order to achieve success or make the organization effective, it is very important to implement a change where any organization is characterized by trust, authenticity, openness and a supportive climate. So, this is also a change that is required to transform organizations in trustworthy or authentic organizations based on authentic leadership. The other is power equalization. Effective organizations de-emphasize hierarchical authority and control. So, it is about more participation, more collaboration rather than focusing on hierarchical authority and control. This is about power equalization, that all employees are equal, there is no hierarchy. The other is confrontation. Problems should be openly confronted, not swept under the rug. So, it is not only about problem concerned with only one group of people or one people. Whenever the problem is there, it should be discussed openly in order to welcome more suggestions, more solutions and more problem solving ideas to resolve any problem within the organization. When this kind of climate is maintained in the organization, then implementation of change becomes more effective and lucid. And the fifth is participation. The more engaged in the decisions they are, the more people affected by a change will be committed to implementing them. So, the idea is that people or employees who are experiencing problem at workplaces must be allowed to participate in the problem solving process, where they are more willing to implement any change in order to resolve the problem, because they are facing it directly. So, they really understand that why there is a need for change and why there is the need for implementation of the change or urgency for the implementation of the change. Therefore, respect, trust, power equalization, confrontation and participation plays major role when we talk about organizational development as a novel approach to change implementation, right. So, what are certain OD techniques of interventions for bringing about change? The first is sensitivity training, survey feedback, process consultation, team building, intergroup development and appreciative inquiry. We will discuss more in detail about these techniques in the next session. That is all for today. Thank you so much.